So we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our very first Policy Talks. My name is Andres. I use he and they pronouns, and I'm the board chair for Portland for All. Portland for All is all volunteer run. We're a 501c4 nonprofit. As an organization, we were born out of conversations folks were having with friends, neighbors, really just concerned about the challenges facing our city and all of the negative rhetoric about the place we call home. So Portland for All is united in our belief that there is a hopeful, positive, and inclusive future that's possible for the city. We know that future will take all of us coming together and working to make it a reality. And that's really what Portland for All was founded to do. For many of the folks here tonight joining us, this might be your first event with Portland for All. Welcome. Thank you for joining. I'm going to take a little bit to share what Portland for All does. We have four key program areas that we do as an organization. The first is our community conversations. So these are town halls. They're planned by teams of neighborhood volunteers, and they help us hear directly from people across Portland about the challenges that they see facing the city and the idea that folks have to address them. Our second is monthly meetups. We alternate locations across town, and they provide a way for new volunteers who are looking to get involved to connect with the folks who are currently leading our programming. They're a chance to have one-on-one and group conversations about what you could do to help Portland for All and join the movement to build a better Portland. The third program is Policy Talks. So this is our newest program, and tonight is our first policy talk. These are an opportunity for us to educate ourselves in our community by bringing together a panel of experts who are doing the work to address the critical challenges that Portland faces. You'll have a chance to hear from some of Portland's best and brightest tonight and throughout these policy talks about how we can address the tough issues facing our city and what programs and policies actually address the root causes of these issues. Our last program area, Portland for All, is a 501c4, which means we're able to endorse candidates and promote leaders who are best equipped and committed to addressing the major challenges facing our city. So we know that politics isn't everyone's cup of tea, and we also know that elected officials have a lot of power. They have the ability to make critical decisions that shape the world we live in. So we're in the process of finalizing exactly how our endorsement process is going to go, starting with the May Multnomah County elections, and we'll be sharing out more information as we get that set up. All of our programs are led by volunteers. So if this sounds like something that you'd like to be a part of, we'd welcome you to sign up for our next monthly meeting. It's going to be on February 12th from 5 to 7 at Bipartisan Cafe. It's a chance to connect with other volunteers and learn more about how you could get involved. So you can keep an eye out for future community conversations and events, and we'll continue to promote opportunities to connect by email and on social media. We're also excited to announce that our next policy talk is going to be next month on February 26th from 5:30 to 7 to help answer the question, how can we help people experiencing homelessness through effective programs and services? We'll have three amazing panelists who will be joining us next month. Dr. Marisa Zapata, the director of Portland State University's Homelessness Research and Action Collaborative, Shannon Singleton, the former executive director of Join, a community organization helping people experiencing homelessness transition into permanent housing, and Kaya Sand, the executive director of Street Roots, a nonprofit social justice newspaper sold by people experiencing homelessness and poverty. So mark your calendars. That's going to be February 26th from 5:30 to 7, and we'll drop a link for that and the monthly meetup in the chat. One last thing before I turn it over to our amazing panelists for tonight's event. Portland for All is completely volunteer run. So to keep growing our reach, we rely on donations to support our work. If tonight's conversation and our programming more broadly is important to you, we ask you to support us in whatever way feels meaningful to you. Thank you all for your support. We're now ready to go ahead and get started with tonight's panel. During the event, you can feel free to submit questions in the QA. that you'd like to ask the panelists. As time permits at the end, we'll ask some questions that were submitted from tonight's audience. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our panelists. Candace Avalos, Lamar Wise, and Mike Schmidt are all incredible. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about who they are and what brought them to this work, starting with Lamar. If you'd like to share a little bit about yourself and what your background is.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Hey everyone. My name is Lamar Wise. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am the political director for Oregon AFSCME. That's my day job, but I also do a bunch of other stuff on the side, which includes chairing the Safety and Justice Oregon PAC, which is a PAC that helps to uplift candidates that share our values of making sure that we are shrinking the system when it comes to corrections and policing and making sure that we are smart on crime. On top of that, I've been a part of the Racial Justice Council. I co-chaired the Police Accountability and Criminal Justice Reform subcommittee on the Governor's Racial Justice Council, and I've been a previous member of the ACLU of Oregon, and have also done a lot of work through Reimagine Oregon to promote public safety policies that are anti-racist and ensuring that we're making real progress by way of keeping everyone safe, no matter who you are. So I'm super excited for the conversation tonight, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Lamar. I told you they're amazing, folks. So next up, I'm going to turn it over to Candace Avalos to introduce herself.
Alrighty, hello everyone, good evening. I'm Candace Avalos, or Candice Avalos in Espanol. My pronouns are she, her. I am an East Portland resident. I identify as a first-generation Black-Tina. I come from a family of immigrants who immigrated in the 70s from Guatemala and Black Americans from Southern Virginia. And I bring that up because it really informs my justice-centered values, and it affects the ways that I show up in my community and have over the last few years in Portland. My day job is as the executive director of Verde, an environmental justice nonprofit in the Cully neighborhood. But I'm showing up here as a community leader working not only in environmental justice, but in all areas of justice related to housing, racial justice, economic justice, community safety, of course. And as the former chair of the Citizen Review Committee, I served on that committee for 6 years. It's Portland's Police Accountability Board for the city. And so bringing in that perspective, as well as somebody who helped craft and pass the real police accountability measure that Portlanders approved in 2020 by 82%, and just helping with the implementation and transition into this new system of accountability. And I'm eager to talk about the ways that police accountability intersecting with environmental justice are all related to community safety. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Candace. And last but certainly not least, Mike, if you wanted to introduce yourself to folks.
Hi, everybody. I'm District Attorney Mike Schmidt. Excited to be here tonight with you to have this conversation. My background, I've been the DA since 2020. I got started a little early because the former district attorney resigned before the end of his term. Before that, I ran the state's Oregon Criminal Justice Commission, which is kind of the state's data and research think tank on all things criminal justice policy. I've worked in the legislature as counsel to House and Senate judiciary committees, and I really got my start before I even went to law school as a high school teacher in New Orleans. And a lot of the things that kind of drive my philosophy and my values stem from my experience of being a teacher in public schools in New Orleans and seeing how my students had interactions with the criminal justice system as sometimes defendants, sometimes victims, sometimes children of incarcerated parents or family members. So that drives a lot of the work and things that I see.
Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you to all of you for joining today. I'm going to go ahead and jump into our first question tonight, which is, we asked the audience this, but for our panelists, what do you see as the key problems facing the Portland Metro when it comes to public safety, and what should we be keeping in mind? And we can go ahead and start with Lamar.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think for me, this is a real easy one. The decades of disinvestment in both the housing sector and behavioral health field. Because of this disinvestment, we have seen a lot by the way of folks not being able to meet their basic needs. And when that happens, you know, that's when we see crime and that's when we see issues with public safety. So, while we are grappling with this investment, we're also trying to figure out, what is the best way forward, and what are the options that we are able to provide for folks in the city. Uh, and alongside of that, we have a clear lack of economic justice as well, right? Folks need clear opportunity to see themselves be secure, financially secure, be able to have food on the table, be able to feed their kids, be able to get where they need to be safely. We need to make sure that the basic functions of our city, of our county, of the metro area, uh, are being met, and being met at a level in which residents of this area is able to actually fully participate in a way where they have dignity in themselves and how they go about life, and also making sure that they have the opportunity to continue to provide not only for themselves and their family, but for the community at large. It's clear that we have a drug issue in Portland, not just Portland, it's all around the state. Um, and and I bring that up not lightly, but I bring this up because, you know, at the end of the day, we need to make sure that treatment for any type of hard drugs or substances uh, is just as easy to access as the drugs themselves, like point blank. Um, our behavioral health system, our substance abuse system is riddled with red tape. It is riddled with, uh, all the different barriers, the the complexity of the Medicaid system and insurance, and really not getting to the root of the problem, which is helping people, making sure that we're providing a real opportunity for folks um, uh, uh, to heal and to address really the traumas that they have been through, because that's really what we're facing fighting up against is the continuous traumas that folks have had either in their own personal lives or the traumas that have been inflicted upon them because of the lack of support systems that our governments have been able to provide. And so, I bring up all these issues to say that we have a lot of work to do, and there's also a lot of opportunity for us to band together and to fix some of these problems that we see. Because at the end of the day, like this is our community, and we all have a responsibility to figure out what's next for us and how we best get our neighbors into a better place.
Yeah. Thank you, Lamar, and thank you for presenting that kind of like high level picture that we have to keep in mind when we talk about safety. Candace, would you like to go next?
Yeah, and thank you again, Lamar. I think that context is really important to frame how we are going to talk about what approaches we need to take and just root it in our community values. So agree with everything you said. I think another layer that I'll add to this is that at the core of our community safety concerns right now is that when people need help, they aren't getting the right responder at the right time. There's a lack of timely responses, there's no shows with no communication, things like that are creating distrust. And then people are interpreting that frustration as the only remedy needs to be more police. And that's not exactly how we fix the problem. So we need to really talk more about our advocacy for the expansion and secured funding for Portland Street Response, for example. That's really critical at a time when we need more on the ground response to both emergency and non-emergency calls. And by creating an entirely new branch of the first responder system that is built for modern times, we can be responsive to the growing mental health needs on our streets. We can ease pressure on our most expensive resources for only the calls that most need them. So a fire truck, an armed response to a violent threat, things like that. And we can't forget the intersectionality of the oppressive and frankly violent history of our current first responder infrastructure's interaction with low-income people, communities of color, and those that experience severe mental health crises. We can't overlook that as we're working to address staffing, policy decisions, and in other words, that just means police accountability is a critical pillar of community safety. Lastly, we need to acknowledge how deeply disconnected our communities are, due largely to the growing economic disparities that Lamar was speaking about. This is affecting the day-to-day quality of life, which really speaks to those larger economic issues. And we lack a lot of low-cost or free third spaces. So these are locations that are facilitating social interaction outside of people that you live with or you work with, and encourage, that public community building relaxation. And that really helps us increase our relationships with our neighbors. So at the end of the day, communities feel safer when they know each other and they can lean on each other to keep each other safe. And that has to be at the core of our approach.
Thank you, Candace. Really appreciate you tying that in and raising up alternative responses like Portland Street Response. Portland for All has been a strong supporter of the Friends of Portland Street Response, and we know we need more options like that to respond to crises. Mike?
All right. So, I'll take a different challenge that hasn't been addressed yet that we've been facing over these past 3 years, which is gun violence in our community. We've really seen, not only here in Portland, but nationally, an increase in gun violence. And I think it's one of these issues that can kind of feed itself and feed on itself. As people feel less safe, they sometimes might feel like what they need is a gun. And as more and more guns are on our streets and we don't have adequate gun safety legislation in place, we're seeing more and more guns show up in different spaces. And altercations that might have started not necessarily as a violent one, but once you put a gun in place, especially if intoxication or other things are present, it can end up deadly. So I think there's a lot of things we can do for gun violence. Obviously, as the district attorney, we have a role, but it's a very reactive role. We show up once the violence is done or once somebody has fired a weapon. And there's a role for accountability and holding people in our community accountable that would do that. But if we're really going to make a difference, we know we have to get upstream of gun violence. And I think there's a whole bunch of ways, and some of these things have already been talked about, but investment in communities. I'm a big proponent of giving young people opportunities to do pro-social things, partnering with organizations that get kids out there playing flag football and basketball leagues and things like that. Those not only give people pro-social activities, but they teach skills like how to navigate disagreements and how to work out interpersonal challenges and problems through, just interaction. So I think, giving opportunities to young people to get out there in the community both can be a good outlet for energy and other things, but also teach valuable lessons. We've partnered with OHSU to study gun violence. Gun violence has been chronically understudied because of the efforts of national lobbying groups like the NRA that have prevented federal dollars and other dollars from being used to study gun violence. So luckily, some of those issues have been relaxed, and we've worked with the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission and OHSU to start a review commission that'll be looking at cases specific to Multnomah County and with people from all different types of disciplines. So teachers, healthcare workers, religious community leaders, people with lived experience with dealing with violence, in both ways, law enforcement, police officers, everybody. And we want everybody's perspective to help us holistically look at these situations where the outcome was a gun violence situation and think about, could we have done anything upstream to have prevented this from happening in the first place? So I think, all of those things, there's no one solution to violence and gun violence in our community. But we know we have to get preventative and have to get upstream of it if we're going to make a difference. And investing in communities is a huge way to do that.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate how even when talking about something really serious like gun violence, we see the connection come back to what Candace was talking about, the needs for our communities to connect and to know each other and to have these spaces and other relationships to be able to withstand challenges. I see folks have been popping questions in the chat, so I encourage you all to keep adding those. We'll try to get through these quickly to be able to leave time for some audience questions. For our next question, we really want to take advantage of the widespread of experience and perspective that our panel has and speak to the role of different folks in responding to public safety, especially government. So starting with Candace and Mike. Mike, if you could talk to what the county's role is when it comes to public safety, and Candace, pulling from your experience on the Citizens Review Committee, if you could speak to the city's role.
So I'll start off with the county. You know, there are some very obvious roles when we talk about public safety, and the two most obvious for the county, or three most obvious, are my office, the district attorney's office, is funded by the county largely. The sheriff and the sheriff's office, her office is funded by the county largely. And then our Department of Community Justice, which is essentially parole and probation, is funded largely by the county. There are many other things the county does that I think is crucial to our public safety. We are finding that institutions like libraries are ever more important to community and community safety, and being a place where people can interact and be connected to resources and safety. Our community health department. So I don't want to too narrowly focus on the public safety, but the ones that people think about are the district attorney's office, the sheriff, and parole and probation. And, you know, for us, I think what we're trying to do, we all have our different roles. The sheriff oversees the jails, and she also has deputies that do some policing and law enforcement kind of patrol work in some of the parts of our county. So she kind of plays a dual role, both in our jails. For me, prosecution is overseeing the prosecutors in the office, setting policy for the county and how our office is going to be handling cases. What cases are we putting the most resources towards? What cases are we focusing our resources on prosecution? And then what does accountability look like? I think that's a big crucial thing. I'm a big believer in accountability. But what does that mean? What does that look like? You know, we know that historically in this country, the United States has been a very punitively focused criminal justice system, and we're an outlier nationally for that reason. But accountability doesn't have to be that. Accountability can recognize that we can hold people accountable for the harm they create and try to do things that can bring them back into society. So accountability can be restorative justice if we're working with victims and finding out from them, what do they need to heal? Accountability can look like a treatment court, a diversion court. Accountability can be deflection into other systems to connect people with resources. We as prosecutors also play a crucial role in trying to make sure that we get things right. And so having accountability for ourselves with a justice integrity unit that recognizes that if we make mistakes, that we have an obligation to our community to correct those mistakes so that public trust can be maintained in our system. So I think those are some of the major roles that county plays in public safety.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that connection and the spread from having these programs that are critical for a functioning society like libraries to coming in after the fact and the county's role and accountability. Candace, do you want to talk about the city's role?
Yeah, I think I'll just keep it simple and say that, you know, the city's role is a lot of like those nuts and bolts of emergency response. So they manage the 911 emergency dispatch. They're doing things like patrolling the streets, enforcement of laws, solving crimes, interacting with the public, and managing conflicts, and also working to build trust. And I think where the city leadership comes in is overseeing the police force, of course, creating policy and cultural practices to improve the police's efficiency, their relationship with the public, holding them accountable, you know, officers have lethal and legal authority over our lives, and that responsibility requires heavy oversight and corrective action when police are contributing more harm to the community. So that's at the core, and I think, you know, it kind of feeds into the system that the county then takes over of what Mike just described. But that's kind of where the city falls.
That's really helpful. So this is something I wasn't super familiar with beforehand, of understanding kind of the distinction of 911 response, emergency dispatch, fire being at the city. The county's role is more coming in after the fact and responding, having the prosecutor's office and other things. I also want to recognize that the system and the big picture isn't just about government. And so, Lamar, if you want to tell us what role advocates have when it comes to public safety.
Yeah, the fun part. So there are great opportunities that are coming up, and you know, have always been there, to make your voice heard, both in local hearings and legislative hearings. I'm sure many of you came out in support of a bunch of different issues that maybe the city has gone through, and we need those voices to continue. In addition to that, supporting organizations that are involved in public safety reform. That can include Safety and Justice Oregon, which again is a PAC. We also have Imagine Black, which is a Black-led organization that has been at the forefront of public safety reform, as well as the Urban League in that effort, and the ACLU, just to name a few. And so there are tons of organizations that are out there that are doing the policy work, that are reaching out to community, making sure that they're getting involved. So just want to make a shameless plug for all my friends there. And then last but not least, also in the vein of continuing to support my friends, I think we need to make sure that we're supporting candidates that share our values, right? Folks that want to be data driven, folks that want to be smart on crime, make sure that that we're creating real opportunity for folks. So, you know, we have two candidates here with us today that share a lot of those values. One of the most progressive DAs in the country, and a community safety champion, both running for DA and for city council respectively. Like, we have a ton of opportunity to make sure that we're moving forward in a way that feels right for our community, and is reflective of the values that we all hold and share.
Thank you so much, Lamar. Uplifting the amazing work done by so many organizations that we deeply value. And then, yeah, appreciating Mike for being with us today, Candace, who's running for city council in East Portland, recognizing the need to uplift those voices. So our next question, we're seeing these come in the chat as well. Community members are increasingly concerned about crime. Folks want to feel safe going about their lives. What specific programs and policies actually help make our communities safer? Candace, do you want to start for this one?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I think as we continue to seek to fundamentally change policing and community safety, we just really need to be grounded in our values for justice when we're looking for these solutions. And that's obviously the thread we're trying to pull through all of our answers, but it's important to keep bringing up and seeing how you can do that in your policymaking and in creating community. We cannot keep turning to police and prison as the answers to gun violence crisis, for example, that is rooted in social and economic causes. So we need to really resist those Band-Aid solutions and show our commitment to the hard work of long-term change. Speaking of specific policies and solutions, I'll just kind of give a couple examples. So, one, investing in community groups that are addressing some of the physical and social infrastructural needs that our communities need, that we see the communities that are resourced and the ones that are underinvested. And you can see the stark difference in the relationships that the people have with each other, the organizations, and just the overall culture of community safety. Of course, we need to reshape a criminal justice system that has time and again dealt people of color a harsher form of justice than their white counterparts. We have to name that. And I think also not just the criminal justice system, like talking about, going to jail and that whole process, but also how are we criminalizing our communities, especially children? So how are we adopting different disciplinary models and educational institutions that really emphasize restorative justice rather than kicking students out of school? That is a huge issue that adds to this culture of, again, just uninvesting in community members, and then they turn to other solutions because they're not resourced. Also empowering communities through investing directly into their environmental surroundings. So that's more green spaces, cleaning up vacant lots. These are things that promote healthier activities. And that's where we see the intersection of community safety and environmental justice. Sidewalks and lights, they go a long, long way in creating safer communities. And these are infrastructure issues that, we don't often connect back to how it affects community safety. And lastly, again, I'm going to continue to harp on holding police accountable for institutional violence that has created generational harm and mistrust. And when you can't turn to somebody to help you in a moment of crisis because they are going to add more to your trauma and to your crisis, then that is a system that is broken and needs to be addressed first and foremost through accountability measures.
Thank you, Candace. And for the spread ranging from things we need to do about our surroundings to addressing these systemic issues. Mike, do you want to talk about what we need to make our community safer?
Yeah, I think from my experience, we have different challenges that come up, and challenges can pop up and become acute, and then they can, kind of fade. But I think what is consistent, no matter what the challenge that we face is, in my experience as DA, is connecting with different people from different walks and trying to tackle these problems holistically. So I've talked about gun violence, partnering with, epidemiologists and teachers and other folks from other, backgrounds and perspectives. And so I think there are a number of things that have impacted our community that we can apply a similar framework and a similar lens to. I'll talk a little bit about bias crimes. We are seeing an uptick in bias crimes, and part of that, we know is stirred up by events that are outside of our local region. National politics can stir up bias crimes. International events and conflicts can stir up bias crimes. Even, pandemics and illness can stir up bias crimes. But so whatever the thing is that is, driving some of these things in our community, I think that, how we respond to those things is what's crucial. So, for me in my office, we've added resources to combat bias crimes. We have a bias crime prosecutor. We have a bias crimes investigator. And I think that what they are doing is really, not only, of course, do they work on specific cases, but they are out there meeting with community members who might be the people who are impacted by these crimes. And bias crimes are one of those things, like a lot of crime. It doesn't just impact the individual who might be targeted. It makes all of us feel less safe. It really tears at the fabric of our feelings of safety in a community. When people are targeted for who they are, or what they look like, or what their perceived background or anything else is, that makes our entire community less safe for a lot of different people. So making connections to community groups, getting out there with like IRCO and other places where we can kind of hear from them what's going on and how we can be of assistance. So bias crimes is an area where I think we can do a lot of work. Domestic violence. Domestic violence is another type of crime that it impacts individuals, but it has ripple effects into entire communities and destabilizing families and children. And, intimate partner violence can be some of the most deadly violence in our community. I've gotten to tour some places around the country, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Nashville, Tennessee, that do a fantastic job, like holistically working with victims of domestic violence. And what they saw is that when you build the services and you have things to offer people and families and the impacted parties, reporting goes up. More people report those things because you're actually offering them not just arrest and prosecution, but you're offering them services that they need. Can be shelter, can be food security, can be, talking to a health provider. There's a lot of different things that survivors need of domestic violence. I think that's an area that we can put a lot of resources. Wage theft is something that I've really been trying to get going in terms of criminal prosecution. We talk a lot about theft in our community and retail theft and everything else, and that's important. Theft is not okay. It doesn't matter who's doing the stealing, but we don't put a lot of emphasis locally or nationally on the number of the theft that is estimated to be the most theft that we face as a community, which is when people have their wages stolen. And that usually is frequently targeting communities that are disempowered or that lack power. So immigrant communities and people who maybe would not feel comfortable reporting their wages being withheld to enforcement tend to be disproportionately targeted for that type of a crime. So I think, when you look at the different types of crimes that are impacting our community and think about how do we create safety, I like to target the crimes that have ripple effects across our entire community. Stolen cars, catalytic converter thefts. I mean, these are things that keep people from going to work. And so we were able to partner with legislators, not to increase penalties and to send more people to prison, but to change who's allowed to sell a catalytic converter and what documentation you need to be able to make that transaction. Once we got that into place, catalytic converter thefts dropped 40% in our community. So again, I think it's about talking to other people, being creative, working across different expertise and purposes, and targeting the things that really destabilize our communities and make us all feel less safe. And knowing that sticking up for one victim is really sticking up for our entire community.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for speaking to kind of the ripple effects and how crime affects our communities, as well as ways we can approach crime in a way that isn't just mass incarceration. Lamar, what have we missed? What do you want to add in?
I mean, when I think about this question, I think, and want to pose to the audience this question of like, what do you think of when you think of safe communities? Like, what does it look like? Like, are you thinking of kids freely playing out in the yard, friendly neighbors, access to resources, the services are robust, right? Maybe there's wealth and you feel comfortable, right? Like whatever that vision is, right? A lot of that is about access. Do we have access to the right resources? Do we have access to opportunity? At the end of the day, like we are all safer when we do have that access, and when we are actually able to improve the lives of ourselves, both ourselves and our neighbors. How do we get there? Right? There's a bunch of different policies that are being considered in this very moment, right? Like we have a huge issue, and I would actually argue we don't really have a behavioral health system. We have a bunch of different nonprofits or for-profit or whatever trying to scrape it all together between city, county, and state government. Earlier today, the governor of Oregon, as well as the chair of Multnomah County, and Mayor Ted Wheeler came out with this intergovernment coordination proposal to kind of start to streamline some of these services. So we should all be watching that very closely and making sure that that is being turned into an actual system that can help people immediately. The Oregon legislature will also be considering a huge housing package to expedite the construction of of affordable housing and ensure that we are giving more opportunity for folks to live somewhere and combat the high increase in rents that we continue to see as well. The Oregon legislature is also considering a slew of behavioral health packages, right? Like I said earlier, we need access. So what does that mean here? Right now, the behavioral health field, like the workforce, since COVID, depending on the region, has shrunk between 10 and 30%. So we have a workforce crisis, and we have a lack of just sheer beds and places to put folks when they voluntarily come for help. With that being said, the Oregon legislature will be considering bolstering that workforce, making sure that we're doing recruitment for culturally responsive care as well, and also making sure that we're building upon infrastructure to allow for more detox facilities and areas where counseling can happen on a deep level. And so, I'm excited for this upcoming short session so that we can advocate for those things and make sure that we get those wins for our communities, because they will be crucial in making sure that we are again getting back to that vision of our safe community. And it's going to take a while, but looking at these proposals, I think we have a chance to start to get there.
Thank you, Lamar. Thank you for speaking to some of the behavioral health system or a lack of a system. I know there were questions that came up in the chat around that, as well as some very specific things that'll be coming up in the legislature this session. We have two more questions before we go to audience questions. Our next one is, how can we talk to friends and family who maybe they share our values, maybe they don't, but either way, they're worried about the problems they're seeing, and they're receiving messages that are linking criminal justice reform to safety and crime concerns. Mike, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. I love this question. First of all, I've been doing criminal justice work now since, 2007, when I got my first job as an intern in the district attorney's office. So I've been around this for 16 years now, going on 17 years. And I've been very privileged in my different jobs and roles. I've gotten to travel our country. I've gotten to travel the world. I've gotten to speak to professionals in, Ireland and Norway and Sweden, and hear from them about Germany, how they approach these things, Portugal. So I've been very, I've really benefited greatly from that. And I think one of the things that kind of makes me a little bit sad is criminal justice, talking about having an effective criminal justice system at times in our history has been incredibly political, and at times it hasn't been, and it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be a left versus right, conservative, liberal, progressive. People across the spectrum, first of all, everybody deserves to feel safe. And anybody not feeling safe, that's real. You need to hear that, and you need to understand why. And everybody's political philosophy should be to try to make this a safe community. And there have been times in our history where that was the case. When I was when I was down working with legislators, it was Senator Jackie Winters, an amazing woman, Republican down there, who passed or helped pass, because of her, some of the most sweeping reforms to how we deal with juveniles in our criminal justice system. And that wasn't a Republican, it was a shared value that young people, brains are different, listening to brain science and understanding the long-term effects of incarceration on young people and what that does to future prospects. And so Senator Jackie Winters was an incredible individual and human being, and advocate for a humane criminal justice system that takes into account the human beings that we're dealing with. There's a number of other Republicans and that have taken similar approaches to other issues that we face, like ballot measure 11 and other things. I think we can all come to this work in different ways and for different reasons, and that's okay. I've talked to some conservative friends of mine who They don't like paying taxes. Heck, I don't love paying taxes, but I am more of a I will vote yes on every tax you propose. But a lot of people don't, and they want to see government efficiency. Well, we know that prisons and jails are some of the most expensive criminal justice interventions we have, and they're not the most effective. So, if you're talking to people that, fiscal conservative policy and having an effective streamlined government is their issue, well, talking about the efficacy of incarceration and how expensive it is can be the way that some people come to this work. I've talked to a lot of people in my family included who are religious and have a more Judeo-Christian religious values perspective on the criminal justice system. And, they might be, what you would consider conservative on a lot of issues. But a lot of those religious values across many denominations, Muslim, everybody believes in forgiveness and acceptance and loving people and, trying to serve people who, need to be served and who come from less and treating them like other people. I mean, these are values that are shared universally amongst religions. And then apply those things to our criminal justice system. If you come from it through it from a religious perspective, you talk a lot about, hey, when somebody has a record that they can never get rid of, maybe forgiveness is something that we should talk about. And that when people do the right things and they're doing everything we want, maybe we should be willing to meet them where they're at and forgive those records so that they can move on with their lives. And of course, if you come at things from a more progressive or a liberal perspective, we talk a lot about root causes and understanding, trauma and how that interacts on brains and decisions that people make. Not to say that, nobody, you don't have personal accountability for the decisions you make in your life. A lot of times I hear when people are kind of going after liberals, they pretend that we think, oh, well, it's you're not in control of your own actions because your situation puts you there. Nobody's saying that. That's a straw man argument. But I think we can recognize that different people have different circumstances in life and come up with different things, and we ought to treat people like individuals while we're talking about accountability. So I think when I talk to other people, I think finding those shared values and safety is a shared value that I think we all have. Things that aren't shared values shouldn't be are misinformation. When you're, trying to use people's legitimate concerns and anxiety and fears to drive agendas and to opportunistically try to take us back to a place where the only solution is punishment and lock them up. I think that's where we have to be on guard. Like we can absolutely acknowledge people's real legitimate concerns and also talk through respectfully real solutions. Obviously, there's a lot of billboards in our community right now, and they try to say that this reform work is related in any way to the challenges that we're facing on our streets. Well, I can tell you that the restorative justice cases my office has have put through the restorative justice process, where victims get to sit down with the person who hurt them and come up with a solution that works for everybody. Those are not cases that are driving crime in our community. Yet it's very easy for people to point to things like restorative justice and say, see, because of that, now you see crime on our streets. So I think, when you're talking to people, find those shared values, honor that people come to this from different perspectives. But I think that we can all agree on a lot of basics, and let's be honest and open and try to keep the misinformation out and try to keep the people who are trying to leverage that opportunistically to divide us. Because I think at the end of the day, people from all walks of life have a lot more in common than they do otherwise.
Thank you, Mike. I think there's a lot of really good stuff there about how to find things in common with folks who might not immediately seem on the same page. Candace, how can we talk to folks who are concerned about these issues?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think we need to meet people where they're at. That is a very simple concept, but it's really important if we're going to move the needle towards progressive solutions. Data does matter, but it's not the only thing that sways opinion. We're not just swayed intellectually, we're swayed emotionally, and we need trusted voices to guide us and help redirect our anger and our passion towards the right solutions. I see this in my neighborhood all the time, just this constant conflict of my neighbors who have compassion for the people who have ended up on the streets. They are angry at the city for their inaction. They are distressed over witnessing drug deals or interacting with community members who are under the influence, and then they are erratic and unpredictable. And Portlanders are holding all of these feelings, and we need to validate those feelings while at the same time pointing to progress, educating people on best practices, and nurturing our interpersonal relationships to better commit to the hard work of long-term solutions. Ultimately, I think this is why efforts like this policy talk put on by Portland for All are so important, because there's been a leadership vacuum and an intense and highly funded propaganda machine that has been working to convince the average person who's holding all these conflicting feelings that the only solutions are the regressive policies that got us into this whole mess in the first place. I think back to the ice storm just 2 weeks ago, and I had my neighbors work together to get people to a shelter. And, I've been thinking a lot about that and how do we cultivate more of that mutual aid, but also show that the government is a reliable and a trusted partner in this effort. So many people who do this really good civic work, they feel deserted by a government that isn't communicating with the public. They're not offering solutions and resources, and they're not being a true partner in this effort. So bridging that gap between the sense of mutual aid and the duty and responsibility of our institutions, like our government, to meet the needs of our community is how we can help, our communities come along this journey to those progressive solutions.
Thank you, Candace. It's so important to recognize that so many folks care. They're just trying to figure out what to do with that. Lamar?
Yeah, I'm going to be quick because I want to get to these other community questions here. So, I usually do just like a quick formula of like, first you got to validate what people are seeing and feeling, right? There is real concern out there, and what folks have either experienced or have witnessed is real. And so I think validating that, and then getting to some common values, like we need to move towards what it actually looks like for that healthy and safe community. And that can only really happen with conversations like these, and I really asking folks like, okay, well, what are you looking for? I think it's so funny when we're in the middle of these conversations. It's like, well, especially when we talk about like downtown Portland, for example, like a lot of folks like, oh, I just don't want to see public use of drugs, for example, right? But then when you dig deeper and you ask like, okay, so you just like want to lock people up, and they're like, oh no, like I want treatment, right? And so it's like, okay, so we do have some common understanding in our community around like smart policy and making sure that we're connecting folks to the right places. And so, in any examples that you can find, or a lot of folks live at the intersection of public safety in one way or another. I'd say use those. Like your personal story will always be your greatest advocate in getting a point across. And so, those are just the formula that I use kind of when talking to my friends and family and other community partners on this issue.
That's super helpful, validating where folks are at, and I appreciate that formula approach. So our last question, we want to recognize the role that mass incarceration and the over-policing of Black and Brown communities has taken in this. How can we take steps to make our community safer without repeating the same mistakes from the past? Candace, do you want to kick us off for this one?
Sure. And, I think all three of us have spoken to this question in a couple of different ways across this event. But I'll just end on this high level note where, I just believe it's so easy for us to get in this mindset where we see a problem and think there's a simple equation that leads to a simple answer. So how do we really embrace the complexity and not resort to the fear and despair, and really lead into that healing process that's going to lead to this vision for a future where we all have equal opportunities to thrive, which is at the core of community safety. And, this requires us to not point our fingers outward and instead look inward, really dig deep, build an environment of mutual aid, roll up our sleeves, and ask that if we're contributing to the problems, we can also contribute to the solutions. So just recognizing every person's individual role is going to be critical in developing this larger, community safety goal for our community. Ultimately, the fact of the matter is police don't curb violence in our communities. The data doesn't necessarily show this. They play a role in responding to crime after it happens, but prevention includes all of us. So the answers are long-term and community-based, and so our thinking and our support needs to be as well.
Thank you, Candace. And that resonates so much. That's always landed for me with the idea that police are responding to crime that has occurred. So if we want to reduce crime, we need to take steps to strengthen and support our communities. Mike, do you want to answer this next?
Yeah, I'll just talk about a few things that I've done. So these are not the end all and be all answers, but some things that have happened here in Multnomah County that I think people would like to know about, which is, one of the things that we adopted early on was an immigration neutral sentencing policy. Recognizing that people with different immigration status, the consequences for any kind of criminal justice involvement could be wildly disparate. So what you might consider to be a misdemeanor, a lower level crime, where for an average person, the result might be, pay a fine or maybe some community service or some very low level, accountability. For some people, that could carry immigration consequences, which could get them, deported, separated from their family, from their community, and just based on that immigration status. So we came up with a policy in the office, instructed all the prosecutors that where you can find charges that are neutral to immigration consequences, but are comparable to the conduct, that is the charge that you shall use in terms of a conviction. So there's still accountability for the conduct that happens. But as prosecutors, we have a choice between sometimes different charges for the conduct that happens. And so we can choose whether or not we want to invoke immigration consequences. And I think that's a way that if the community knows about that, we can build trust with the community. Because also what I see is some of our immigrant communities are targeted for, for crime happening. And they might be hesitant to report that crime to law enforcement or the police because they're uncertain or concerned about immigration consequences. So I think that's a way that we can try to build trust. We developed a Measure 11 step court, which Measure 11, for those of you who don't know about that, it's our one size fits all, one strike you're out law in the state of Oregon, where if you're convicted of that crime, you will do that amount of prison time. We developed a treatment court that focuses on those crimes, and especially the crimes where we see a lot of disparity in our criminal justice system, where young Black men make up 25% of the people we prosecute in this category. And so we started a treatment court, and 2 years in, we've had about a dozen graduates, and our recidivism rate is less than 10%. You compare that to the recidivism rate of people coming out of prison, which is closer to 40% or 50%. So we are creating public safety, we're decreasing incarceration and decreasing disparity in our system, and it's more cost effective. So it's like a win-win-win-win. So those are some interventions. We also just briefly have a justice integrity unit that looks back and says, did we make a mistake on previous convictions? And before we had a justice integrity unit in the entire 100 and some year history of the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office, there were 8 cases that were flagged as potentially being wrongful convictions. After having a criminal justice unit for the last couple years, we've added 12 more cases to those 8 in just 2 years. finding cases where mistakes were made and people were wrongfully convicted, and then doing the right thing to fix those things. Those are all ways that I think we can build more trust and legitimacy with our community and decrease incarceration and disparity.
Thank you, Mike. So important to build trust with community and repair the real harm that's been done through steps like that. Lamar?
Yeah. So I think Mike Schmidt talked about this a little bit, but we have an opportunity to support funding for restorative justice. And again, for folks who don't know, that is it's a method in which we center healing of the victim, and also we center the accountability of the person who did harm. The Oregon legislature will be considering a grant program for restorative justice to make sure that folks who may be charged with a felony are able to go through this process and really get at what will make the folks who have been harmed in the process whole again. And so I'm really looking forward to that proposal coming out. I also think that we have a variety of community groups in Portland and kind of like in the metro area that provide services for kids after school, right? And making sure that they are able to be somewhere safe, continue to learn, socialize, and be a part of the greater community. Those are programs that we need to be supporting, and those are funded at times through city government, right? And so we need to make sure that that proposals like that reach the city halls and make sure that we're doing that advocacy in funding that. And so, yeah.
Thank you, Lamar, and thank you all of you. Thank you for engaging with these questions. We want to spend the last 20 minutes really digging into the audience questions because we got a lot of really good ones. We have some around Measure 110, around downtown, around firearms, and how to hold police accountable. I'm actually going to take the first bite at one of them. There's some around Portland street response, and that's something that Portland for All has worked a lot around. So the questions were, how can citizens help PSR get more funded? And since behavioral health is so important, why not put it in the county? So for Portland Street Response, I think most folks have heard of friendsofpsr.com. Great place to start. They have a really strong petition with specific asks. So spreading that through your friends and family is something folks can do. There's going to be budget hearings coming up for the next city council budget. Those are opportunities to show up and testify to ask for the program to be fully funded. Folks who care about this can donate, they can volunteer, and they can vote for candidates who are committed to fully funding and expanding PSR, right? Like we need leaders in office who are going to do something different. And then someone else popped in the chat that the Portland Committee for Community Engaged Policing is going to have a discussion tomorrow night on Portland Street Response and the audit findings. So that's another opportunity for folks to connect and plug in. Just really quick on the county piece, I think something that's really important is remembering that this should be a first response option, right? It should be an alternative to police responding to a scene when someone's in crisis. And currently, the city of Portland handles 911 calls and dispatches to fire and police. So that's one reason that it's currently at police. I think there's really good reasons to expand the reach to Gresham and other parts of the county, but just keeping that in mind for folks. The first set of questions for our panelists are around Measure 110. So we had questions on why it took so long to go from Measure 110 to full implementation, and also questions about uncooperative partners who might not have been on the same page, and how the region can get everyone to work together to collaborate and to get this fully set up. Do one of you want to address part of that first?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. Yeah, so let's get into it. And obviously this is my own opinion, but we have a great system here in Oregon, by which you can put legislation up to a vote of the people by initiative petition. So by way of that, it's like a great democratic process that we have here in Oregon. what comes with that, though, at times is, there are advocates that are able to write that piece of legislation, and there needs to be a certain amount of tweaks that happen afterwards. And so that's what the legislature had to do and has been trying to do since the passage of Measure 110, is to make sure that how it was written actually is fitting in with the current and existing structures that our government has. It's fair to say that that our government was not ready for the amount of changes that that Measure 110 was bringing. Also, my personal opinion, when we decriminalize drugs without making sure that all of these support systems were in place front, it seems as though now we are playing catch up, and because in a lot of ways we are, right? And so when we think through what is good policy making and making sure that we're providing an opportunity to get it right, it takes time, and it also takes a lot of listening to stakeholders, community members, to make sure that that we're getting it right. I think also part of that question was like, a partner is unwilling to work together. I'm not sure about the extent of that, but I do know OHA had to kind of like staff up. There was issues getting the money out, and it's been slow to reach the places where it needs to go. And again, this kind of reaches back at some of the bureaucracy that I was talking about earlier, right? It's like we need to make sure that we are cutting down on that red tape, making sure that we're getting people the services that they need, and so I think we are still a ways out from actually seeing the full effects of Measure 110, and the wonders that it could do for the community. But I think the amount of adjustments that it's need to have has slowed down a lot of the progress, because of the nature in which it passed. And so yeah, I don't know, that's my personal opinion.
Super. Mike, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add, it was great the other day. I went to the BHRC downtown, the Behavioral Health Resource Center downtown, and I got to be there on a day, and they've done this a few times now, where they had police officers from Portland Police. They had some state troopers from state police available, and then they had different service providers from the community, and they all showed up to have this initial staffing. And the service provider, everybody talked what their role was going to be. The service providers literally said, hey, today I have 3 detox beds right now this morning that we can get. And then somebody else said, okay, I have 4 residential beds that we can get people in. And somebody else said, I got how. So like they were adding up, what are our resources that right now? And then they said, they had their huddle. They said break. The police officers went out and they started contacting people, and they had interactions with folks, and they said, hey, we've got some resources today. Is that something you'd be interested in? And if they came into contact with somebody for whatever reason that wanted to take them up on that, they were calling right away to this kind of dispatch center, and 2 peers would show up, and the police would disengage, and they would go on and continue doing what they're doing in the community, and they would hand it off. And we saw people immediately right there make contact and then get connected to resources. And it was pretty magical to see that availability being there. And I was talking to some of the police officers, these are bike cops, and they were like, they're starting to get flagged down now by people on the streets saying, hey, are you working with those people today that have the resources? And not that police officers have to be the delivery tool or the intervention, but it was amazing to see the police officers working together with the treatment providers and the peers, and collaboratively, and everybody throwing their resources into the middle and saying, this is what we got today, and then immediately connecting people to resources. We need to see a lot more of interventions like that, of that collaboration across systems and the availability of on-demand treatment and resources. It was really, really great.
Thank you, Mike. That's really helpful to hear that, like what's happening on the ground. Candace?
I just wanted to add one of my personal opinions, which is that it's not lost on me that Oregonians are going to the ballot box through these initiatives to solve these problems that our legislators have just not addressed for so long. So I just want to, that's my personal opinion, but I just think, we can't like, and, and Measure 110 has been delivering critical dollars to stand up this infrastructure for these spaces, because if you are in the community and you need this service and it's just not there, then what are you supposed to do? There are so many folks, I think, talking about dispelling these like myths that people feel that, oh, the people don't want help, that they are choosing this life. And there are so many people that want help and they don't get it. And when you can't meet the need of the people who want the help, then how do we expect to convert the folks that need those extra layers, those extra steps to want the help as well? So that's very frustrating, I think, in like the propaganda that we hear. And we need to just cut that out. We need to dispel this myth that people don't want to be successful and live healthy lives. People absolutely want that. And these dollars are being generated in a way that can put them directly in there. And yes, now the legislature needs to tweak some of the, the ways that they can do that. But again, not lost on me that the people took action to correct the injustice that we've been seeing for so long. And I think that's important to remember.
Thanks, Candace. Really appreciate that. And it reminds me of, I've been hearing that we still don't have the beds and the treatment services needed to help folks who want to get help. And so when we're talking about forcing people into the treatment isn't there for folks who want it right now. And we really need to start by providing that first. We got a question around downtown. I believe all three of you were on the governor's task force. And I know a lot came out of that conversation. Is there anything you want to uplift from the final recommendations or from all of the conversations that folks had of when we think of downtown, what is needed, what would be helpful, and how that connects back to safety?
I love that none of us are chomping at the bit because we all have very mixed feelings about that. I guess what I will start with to say is, I have mixed feelings about that effort because one, I think that the people that were congregated to that table, we needed different voices to be there. It was very business heavy, and the downtown businesses obviously have a vested interest in these solutions, but they're not equipped with the right tools to help address some of those. And so I felt like the conversations were skewed at times. That being said, I feel like we really were a room of unlikely partners coming together and agreeing on what some of the problems are and agreeing on the spirit of what the solutions are. And I thought that brought me hope. That brought me hope to be in a room with people who on the regular day-to-day I disagree with, I will advocate against, and yet we're at the table and we're trying to come to terms with how do we help fix the city that we love. And so I think that was an important outcome, even if I didn't personally agree with all of the recommendations that came out of that. And yes, it's important to think about the downtown core and how that reflects on the larger Portland community, but so many of Portland's communities outside of downtown are experiencing this. And so it also was a struggle to just see this like very narrow focus when we have widespread issues across the city. And, the folks that get displaced from the downtown streets, when we do things like sweep them away and not give them a place to go, they end up on the streets of East Portland and then they're forgotten. And so, yes, it's important to talk about the economic development of downtown and addressing, just the larger, like the more visibility that we see in downtown due to there being a lot of services there. And that's why communities congregate around those services. But yeah, it was tricky I know so many community members came to me and they're like, I appreciate that they're talking about downtown, but what about me? What about me in Northeast Portland and Southeast and East and Southwest? And I feel like that was a missed opportunity to look holistically at how to address it.
Thank you, Candace. Really appreciate that perspective. Lamar?
Yeah, I think that was right on the spot there, Candace. Like, would like to retweet the amount of folks on the business community that were there. You know, I'm still looking at kind of like what the set of recommendations that was just posted. I do think that that intergovernment like relationship, between the state, between the county, and between the city, I do think that that is crucial, and I think that that's an opportunity for us to build something long term, and which is why earlier I said like, hey, we need to really be watching this because this could be this could be something that was just put together quickly to respond to a moment, or we can actually take this opportunity to build real infrastructure and an actual behavioral health system, and also make sure that there is seamless communication between all the services that are available to us. And so yeah, so yeah, I'm excited at the opportunity. Definitely hesitant to kind of see where things are going to go. But yeah, but I do think that the coordination here is going to be key to our success.
Thank you, Lamar. And on that business point, I think something we've heard is which businesses were represented, right? We know that there's a lot of businesses who were not included in the conversation. Stephen Green from Business for a Better Portland represents a lot of businesses who have a different perspective on what is going on and what the problem is downtown and what the right solutions are. Mike?
Yeah, I'll just say, and I love Stephen Green. I just met with him this week in Better Business. So I appreciate the work that they're doing to bring other voices and more diversity into the business community conversation. I work downtown. I love being downtown. I love going and walking for lunch at different places. I think that there are just some other realities, though, that downtowns across the country are coming to terms with post-pandemic. And that is we have a changed work environment and a changed work landscape and work from home, and businesses downsizing their footprints is a real reality. And so I think now is a time of there's some pain that goes along with that, but it's also a time of opportunity to imagine what a downtown that attracts and serves people from all different walks can look like. Mixed use, multi-purpose businesses and housing and other things that really, revitalize space and make people want to go to it. I'll say that as somebody who works downtown every day, please, if you haven't, come down and visit. There's a lot of really great things going on down there. I've taken my little ones to the Lion King and the ice skating rink and all kinds of great different things, and the tree lighting, all stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of improvements going on, and I think that's one of the things where again, just to mention, you see these billboards and this dark money stuff, and they're trying to scare people, and I don't see how that's productive to any of our interests. So I think that this is an opportunity for all of us to imagine what we want our downtown to look like and lean in and support businesses. And I also agree, I want to see the same efforts across our county.
Thank you, Mike. And I love that idea of like, how can we lean into this moment to imagine a more hopeful downtown that is meeting our needs, that is serving the Portland of the future, not just what Portland was. We're coming up on time. I want to respect everyone's participation, everyone who stuck with us tonight. Our amazing panelists, so grateful for you sharing your expertise, your perspective, your wisdom, and helping us see what a hopeful future for public safety in Portland is. How can folks keep track of you? How can folks follow up with you and the work you're doing and stay involved? Mike?
So for me, obviously, I'm right now in an election cycle. My race is in May. It's a primary, but it'll be decided likely in the primary because there's only 2 candidates in the race. So to keep up with me, we're doing community events. I'm, going out talking to members all over our community. I have a website, MikeSchmidtForDA.com. Go to that. You can volunteer, donate. We're going to be doing door knocking. We're going to be doing, phone banking, text banking, all the things, and working with our partner organizations and so many other great candidates and causes out there, collaborating with one another to lift up all of our voices. So I'm really looking forward to that and to engage with that. Look us up on the web and sign up.
Thank you so much, Mike. Candace, how can folks keep up with you?
Well, because I'm a millennial, I'm going to send you to my social media, of course, but I'm not Gen Z, so my TikTok is kind of eh. So you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Candace for PDX. And I think more than anything, all three of us are really try to use our social media to bring people along in these conversations, invite them to spaces like this. Portland for All, obviously, you need to follow. And I'm just really heartened by just the questions, the discussion that I saw in the Q&A. And I feel like there's a lot of energy here that I want us to continue to capture and build on. So, following our pages where we can continue to invite you to these events. And we always are posting calls to action to show up to City Hall, show up to Multnomah County and speak out, because the opposition is organizing, y'all. And so we have to organize too. And that means showing up. That means being engaged. So please follow us on social media and we'll keep you apprised of what's the latest. Thank you.
Thanks, Candace. So we have Mike Schmidt for DA.com. We have Candace for PDX. Lamar, anything you want to lift up?
Yeah. I'm luckily not running for office and I'm so excited, but I still do have a Twitter. It's at Lamar Wise 3. I don't know why there's a 3 there, but yeah, hey, sometimes I say things on there. Feel free to follow me there.
Thank you so much, Lamar. And thank you again for everyone who tuned in tonight. You can keep track of us, Portland for All. You'll get emails from us. We're also going to be doing some fun phone banking and following up with folks after this event to hear how it went for you. We know the webinar format doesn't allow for dialogue. So we want to really connect with you all and encourage you to get involved, right? Like all of us are volunteers. We're just trying to make our city better and we need all the help we can get. So thank you. Have a good night and take care, everyone.